And welcome to my live interview today for the Victorious Souls podcast. I'm Danielle Burnock from danielleburnock.com. Love yourself from Survive to Thrive, that lady on the internet who loves you. Today with a gentleman named Collin Jewett. Collin Jewett is an industrial engineer, an author, and an accelerated learning coach. As a university student, he found himself lost, adrift, and struggling with an identity crisis. But he's not struggling with that anymore. I'm going to bring him in for you to meet him today, because now he helps other people discover who they are and what they can do. So please welcome with me my guest today, Collin Jewett. Thank you, Collin, for being with me today.
Hey, Danielle. Super excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, you had a big change that took place when you were away at Purdue University. But what was your life like before all of that, like growing up and the things that led to all those struggles that came to a head while you were at Purdue?
Sure. So I think that my background before Purdue it's not an exceptional one. I think it's relatively normal, especially in America. So I grew up going to a private Christian school. That was K through 12. So I was with the same roughly 100 classmates for a really long time.
Wow.
And I'm the youngest of three in my family. So my siblings are 5 and 7 years older than me. They're both artists, which is pretty cool as well. And yeah, so before that, I mean, it's pretty normal, honestly. There's not a whole lot to say. I mean, I could tell stories that would bore people all day about my childhood, but I think the fact that it was pretty normal in a lot of respects is actually one of the things that makes what comes next or what comes after pretty interesting, and I think it'll resonate with lots of people.
Okay. Well, you said that your parents had got divorced. How old were you when that took place?
Yeah, so that happened actually when I was a sophomore in college. So I was already
Oh, wow, so it was later.
Yeah, I was already out of the home. But yeah, that was an interesting experience. I think I can say that I'm blessed that happened later. I think I was definitely in a better place to be able to handle it. Not that it didn't have any sort of negative effects, of course, but
Right.
But yeah, growing up, our family was quiet, seemed relatively happy to me. I wouldn't describe my childhood as very negative or traumatic at all. But I do think there were a lot of things now looking back that affected me in very subtle ways. And I think that, the change that occurred in college, or at least started in college, I think had a lot to do with the way that I was raised, but also the way that a lot of people are raised. So I'm being very cryptic here, but maybe we can get into what that means.
Well, I think that that's important too when you say a lot of people, because people go through things and they just dismiss it. That's the way I grew up, but it's affecting them. Like you said, things were affecting you. You mentioned you went to this private Christian school, but then you were bored there. Weren't you bored at school?
Yeah. So I think people experience their especially early education differently. And I'm talking specifically in America. I don't have a lot of experience with education systems around the world, but at least I think the school I grew up in was regular in a lot of ways, in the sense that it was authoritarian, which is, I think people don't often realize that they're being raised in an authoritarian, essentially small community. It's not something people really think about a lot, but that's most of the education system in the US and a lot of places in the world is authoritarian. And I think that has a pretty profound effect on people and the way that we think. And I think that's one of the things that, I kind of had like a sudden realization when I was at Purdue, kind of looking back and realizing that essentially my whole life I had been brought up, at least in school, to think that there were right answers. There's one right answer, and one thing about thinking that there is a right answer to every question is that it means you don't have to ask very many questions. Pretty much always the right question to ask is, what's the right answer? And once someone else tells me the right answer, then, well, that question can be put to rest, or that topic is put to rest, and there's no more thinking to do. And I think that's how a lot of people are raised. We're raised to think that, hey, well, there is a right answer to all these questions. And once somebody tells it to you, you can be done thinking with that, thinking about that, which is nice because, hey, it's one less thing, right?
Well, it depends on what that question was. If it's something you want, if it impacts your life, or if it's like, what's the square root of this square, or something like that. Or if it's something much bigger, like with life, which I think that's what you're getting at, is has to do with how you think instead of being told what to think, how to think, and creative thinking and critical thinking and things like that, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And so I think what a lot of people experience when they go through school, and I think this can be tied to IQ, but also to some other things, is, school is typically oriented, especially grade school, not so much university per se, but grade school is really developed and built around the idea of there being an average student, right? So that it has to cater to an average, because it's supposed to be one size fits all. You've got large class sizes and everything like that. So the average student doesn't really exist. And so what you get is you have everybody who's above average as it pertains to the way that school works, feels like things are going too slow, doesn't really enjoy the learning process that you're supposed to be going through. Everyone who is below average as it pertains to things in school feels everything's too fast. They feel confused. They feel stupid. And there's really nobody that it's built for. It's built for a hypothetical person that doesn't exist. And I think that has a lot of really negative consequences.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like how that had affected you growing up when you got to university, that you had said that you frequently felt stupid, that they even misdiagnosed you with like test anxiety or something like that, right? How did this all play out once you got to Purdue?
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a misdiagnosis. I was certainly anxious taking tests, but yeah, so growing up in grade school, I was always ahead of the curve. Everything felt super slow. I was always bored. I was always looking out the window. I never took notes. I never studied. I got straight A's. I didn't have to do anything.
Nice, be nice. A lot of us are going, yeah, that'd be nice.
Well, it's it's
But it's
nice in
not.
one
It
way,
has its
but
own problems,
but
right?
yeah, it's really not. It's just like the way that school is built. Some people, it's going to be, mundane and easy for them, and that's miserable in a way, because, again, I was spending all my time staring out the window wishing I was somewhere else, whereas for other people, they're wishing they were somewhere else because they feel stupid and behind. And so I got both sides of the coin, because in grade school I was the one who, I felt like I was the fast kid, and everything was easy and boring. And then I got to college. I went to engineering school, and suddenly I wasn't that person anymore. I was the
Wow.
person who, I was looking around me, and everybody else seemed to be, they had social lives, they were doing all this stuff, they were passing tests. It seemed like, I mean, they were stressed. Everybody says they're sleep deprived, whatever, but they were doing fine, and they were certainly doing better than me grade wise. And at the job fairs, I think I told you about this, like, you'd have these job fairs where there are a couple hundred companies, and there are 40,000 students competing for internships at these companies. I'm standing in these long lines, and I get up to the front of the line to the interviewers. I hand them my resume, and they're like, "Oh, your GPA is," it was like 2.4 for something like that for me. And they're like, "Why did you even get in this line? Like, that's below our minimum requirement. Like, why are you here?" Which is a really hard thing to hear, because I was, going
Yeah.
through a lot. Um, but it was just, I was like, what is the secret? What's the magic here? Because I've always thought I was smart. Apparently I'm not. And I'm trying to learn all those things I never learned in school, like, how to study, how to take notes. I would go to office hours with my professor. I was doing all the things you're supposed to do as a good student. And by the way, I didn't drink at all. I didn't party. Like, I was just really trying to do well in school, and not succeeding. And so I think being on both sides of that coin, I think, was really valuable to me, because it helped me to recognize that there was something about the system, that I didn't understand. And
Mhm.
then there was also a lot about myself that I didn't understand, because clearly if I did understand those things, I'd be doing much better. And I would know why, what contributed to the success or failure.
Yeah. So what did you do to break out of that? How did you break out of that, doing all the things and getting nowhere? How'd you finally get out of that?
Yeah. So one big part of it, I mean, I think this was important. So I did go to the Disability Resource Center. That's where they told me, hey, you get really bad testing anxiety, which was kind of obvious. It's like I'd go to a test and I immediately didn't know anything, which I can I can now explain why that happens in the brain if you're interested. But yeah, so I'd just blank out and then I'd fail. So they were like, all right, we're going to give you extended time on tests in a quiet space. And that did help because I wasn't as anxious. Of course, that's going to help. Um, but it also, it felt to me like a Band-Aid solution.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, okay, well, I've always finished tests early, in high school. So this seems like there's more to it than just I need more time on tests. Like
Yeah,
that
that's
doesn't
why I
feel.
said it was a misdiagnosis, because I think it was like a close, but it didn't really hit the nail on the head like you called it a Band-Aid. It did some help, but it didn't
Yeah, it's like
fix the
what was
problem.
the what was the source of the anxiety? What was causing all the problems? And
Right.
that was just kind of addressing a symptom. And so I started, doing what people do these days, which is just start googling things. And I was like, okay, like test hacks, learning hacks, how do I learn faster, all these things. And eventually I found um, an online course, which ended up being super helpful. And I actually work with this company now, so I have nothing but gratitude. But I found a course that was all about how to learn faster and how to unlock your memory, which is something I help people do now. It's really fun. But I think the most valuable thing about that course and what I learned was it wasn't because my brain was broken that I was doing poorly. It was because I didn't understand how to use it. And also I didn't understand the environment that I was actually in. I didn't understand the problems I was engaging with. I didn't know their nature, so to speak. I thought they were one thing and they were not. And so at least with first on the thinking my brain was broken and realizing it wasn't. So one thing I learned from that course, which the skill is cool, but it's kind of more of a party trick in a lot of ways, is like I learned how to like memorize indefinite strings of numbers. Okay, it was just kind of cool. Like again, who
Okay.
cares? But it was it was like this fun party trick. But what it showed me about myself was like, oh, I've always had this ability. I just had no idea how to use it. So
Mm.
it caused me to ask the question, what else do I not know about what my brain is capable of? What other abilities are just lying under the surface that I could tap into that I just don't even know exist? And asking that question, I think that really started to change my life and change my how I saw myself and how I saw the world, was asking the question of like, well, what could be here that I just don't know about? And that's the opposite of, I think, how we're kind of reinforced to think in school. At least I felt like that for me,
Mm-hmm.
was if there was something I need to know, my teacher is going to tell me. And it's like, well, maybe not, because maybe they don't know. It's not about just getting answers. It's about asking questions. And I don't feel like I was really brought up especially in school, reinforced to ask questions. Like that was important. If you had a question, it was like, what's the right answer to this problem that you've presented? Not,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like I can ask questions that nobody can answer and that only I can explore. And that's an adventure I can go on. It's not something that someone can give me.
Wow, that
And
sounds
that just
cool.
opened up, all of a sudden learning became something that was really exciting for me again. And that's what I try to help people realize too, and rediscover is the joy of learning. The joy of learning
Mm-hmm.
is, it's not about answering questions that other people have posed. It's about posing your own questions, being curious, and then exploring that and seeing where it takes you. And I like to say that the most important questions you can ask, you can't get answered on Google. Like you can't Google like, what's the meaning of life? I mean, you're going to get lots of
People do.
answers, but sure, you can Google that, but it can't just tell you. It's not like, here's the answer. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to go on a journey and no one can give you a journey. So
Right.
that was maybe one of the first kind of eureka moments that changed the way that I thought.
Right. It sounds like all of that schooling and stuff until you got to college was all like people, like you talk about the questions and the right answer kind of thing, that they were telling you this and they were telling you this and they were telling you this, and then I need to go and I need to learn that and learn that. Whereas then you came to a place where no, there's so much more to learn. There's so much more. And so you did a deep dive into what you think and how you how you think and the way to think and what there is to learn and how to learn. It's like, I just see you doing a deep dive into all of that information with, I like your word curiosity. That's part of your company is curiosity. Curiosity Jump, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you jumped into the curiosity pool, with just
Exactly.
so much just asking questions after questions after questions. And that's what children do when they're small, if they're allowed to.
Mhm.
They ask lots of questions. It's how they learn until people get squelched with that, like I did growing up,
Mhm.
or in some, school systems. And like you talked about the authoritarian, it's like, well, no, we're not going to explore that. We need to get to the point of today's lesson, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and what you said about kids there is definitely true. It's you don't actually need to teach people how to learn. That's already built in. I think oftentimes what I end up doing, so I've done a lot of one-on-one coaching with people and I've taught courses, and what I'm actually teaching people, I'm not teaching people how to learn. I'm helping them rediscover some abilities that they already have. I'm helping them to tap into things that they've unlearned or that were kind of crushed out of them. I'm just nurturing those back to life, giving people the opportunities to find those again. So it's not like, hey, I'm gonna teach you how to learn. It's like you already know how to learn. You've just forgotten. It's been crushed out of you. That's really really sad. So I kind of presented there were two different things that I felt like I needed to explore. So one of them was, who am I? How does my brain work? Like, what is learning? I think the other side of it was more about like the systemic aspect of it. Like, what is education? Because, if you ask people that question, the first thing they think of is school. They think of the building that they went to for years and years and years, and the classes, the desk that they sat in, and the teacher who talked at them, and the things that they wrote on the board. Like that's what people think oftentimes when you talk about education. And so I started to, question that: is that what education is? Are school and education the same thing? Are they just synonyms, or is there a difference? And the more I thought of it, more I think this is a really useful way to think about what learning is it's not the only way, but it's one way. It's your ability to adapt to your perceived environment. So your ability to adapt to your perceived environment, and one of the key words there is perceived, and we can jump into that. I think there's a whole can of worms there that's really interesting to go into. But when I think about education, it's like education is your preparedness to engage with that environment. So it's your preparedness either to adapt to that environment, or let's say your ability to adapt to the environment, or your adaptation to the environment. You can kind of think of it both ways. Education is preparation in that sense. And I think one thing that's really important about that is that everybody has different environments. Like you and I can be in the same room and have completely different environments because our physical environment, the things around us, constitute a very, very, very small sliver of our actual environment. We have our memories, which I think constitute a much larger portion of our environment than the walls that are around me. And you can see this, and I think it's pretty self-evident, but if you take somebody like an office worker who's sitting in a cubicle and you like hook them up to machines to, measure their physiological arousal or anything like that, it's like, according to the data we're getting, this person seems like they're in a life or death situation. And then you look at their environment, you're like, they're sitting in a cubicle, they're working on a computer, they're well fed, they're completely safe, they're extremely insulated from like the hostility of nature. And yet it seems like they're extraordinarily stressed and aroused and ready to like fight or flight. Like, why is that? And people are in this situation all the time where they're, if you just ask their body, so to speak, it would say, I am in a terrifying, stressful situation, but there's nothing in their immediate physical environment that would justify that, which tells us a lot about what is our actual environment. It's so much more than our physical space. It's our distorted version of the past that lives in our memories. It's the way in which our body has adapted to that perceived environment. So the things that are kind of pre-programmed in your cerebellum and the things that are running back there. It's your anticipated future, and there's indefinite number of those that you're constantly anticipating and shifting around. It's the social environment, the different people that you're interacting with, actually the versions of those people that live in your brain, which are not the same ones that are actually out there, and they can be much scarier. It's the unknown. I mean, there's so many different things. And when I looked at what does school do? Well, essentially what it's trying to do, it's trying to give you some sort of general basis of knowledge. It's trying to give you information that hypothetically is going to help you in a vast number of situations. And you have to ask, like, well, if education is preparedness to engage with your perceived environment, and that's completely unique to the individual, is it really possible to give somebody, is it possible to give somebody an education? Can you really give them knowledge that is guaranteed to help them in their specific situation? Is anybody really equipped to do that for somebody else? And I would argue that I think that's a really hard position to actually argue for. Like, I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it really makes sense to try to, say, hey, here's this information, and this is the information you should focus on to the exclusion of everything else that's going to help you in your specific environment that's completely unpredictable and that we have no way to anticipate. Why do we think we can do that?
Can you give like an example from one of your clients? You don't have to name names or anything like that, of how you talked about you don't teach them how to learn, but you remind them how, or open their eyes to that. Can you give like an example of what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say if there's anything that's generalizable to everybody, it's self-knowledge, which again, like, I can't give you knowledge about yourself. I can't tell you about you. I can tell you some things about humans that could be really helpful to you. But really what I think an educator can do is ask questions and to prompt somebody to go on an individual journey. And so that's what coaching really is. If you look at, what I would say a real coach, at least according to the industry definition these days, what they actually do, they do not give somebody knowledge.
Right.
They ask them questions and they help them to find things within themselves, which it sounds fluffy, but it's true.
No, it doesn't. I'm a coach too. I understand that. So
Exactly.
what are some questions that you would ask in this situation regarding them learning and educating themselves, or what are some of the questions that you would typically ask?
Yeah, one question I really like, I actually asked it to you right before we started because I wanted to see what you'd say. But it's, what are you most curious about? And I think your answer to that question was pretty common, actually, which is the first thing that you said was, well, that's a really hard question. It's not something that people don't think of it in that language very often, of what am I curious about?
Right. It's not terminology that is common out there. And like I had shared with you, my curiosity had been squelched as a child. So developing curiosity is something that you can re-tap into later. Like, oh, being curious, that's a good thing. Yeah. I mean, that's, they have the thing, curiosity killed the cat. That's how some people, they shut that down. But curiosity is how we get inventions and innovations and things like that.
Yeah, and there's a good reason why you're curious about something. Like, it's not completely arbitrary. And if you ask yourself, well, what am I really curious about? And then once you start to find some answers to that question, ask why. Why are you curious about that? You could be curious about anything. There are people who are curious about things that you're definitely not curious about.
True.
What's the difference? Why are you curious about that when this person is curious about this completely opposite thing that sounds horrendously boring to you? I think there's a lot to be gained from that. And it's interesting that you can have people who are raised in almost the exact same way. Their environments are very similar to each other. It would be hard for you to distinguish what really caused the differences if you think it happens after they're born as opposed to before, but they'll be curious about completely different things. Well, that's kind of weird because, you'd think that if we kind of think of absolute behaviorism and we think that the environment just reinforces us and that's what determines all of our behavior and the way that we think, the people who are reinforced in a very, very similar way would have extremely similar interests in the things that they're curious about. And there's some truth to that, but it's definitely not the case, which is, I think, one of the reasons why, school caters to a hypothetical person that doesn't exist, is that all of those students in school are curious about completely different things to completely different degrees. And you can tell because if you just let them freely pursue their own interests, they'll all pursue different things and spend different amounts of time. And I think this also incorporates the idea of, why is something fun? Is because some things are really fun to
I have been
you
curious about that.
that are not fun to me. Yeah.
Right.
And a big part of it is it's where interest and challenge meet,
Oh, wow.
right? So if you have something that you're really interested about and you're also competent to some degree. So for example, if you watch kids in their play when they're playing with each other, they will try to optimize the challenge to their skill level automatically. You don't have to tell them to do that. You don't have to be like, okay, you should probably like play this version of the game because it's going to be most fun to you. They will figure it out spontaneously very quickly, and they will operate at their optimal challenge level. And so I think a lot of people have this misperception of people that we're just intrinsically lazy, and if we had the option to, we would all just sit on the couch all day and do nothing, which is
I don't think so.
obviously false. It's obviously not true, because I mean, people do stuff,
Mhm.
and a lot of them don't have to, or at least they don't have to do that much. And so, kids, I think people, when they also think about education, they think, well, you have to force kids to learn, because if you don't, they won't learn anything. It's
Oh,
like,
that's not true.
what are you talking about? Did you force kids to learn to walk? No, they did that all on their own. They're out there exploring. It's only once you force them into a classroom environment and tell them they have to do things that all of a sudden they seem very unmotivated. It's like, well,
Right.
maybe they're unmotivated because you're trying to force them to do something that isn't optimally challenging to them, that they're not interested in.
Right.
And so, yeah, people will they won't pursue the hardest possible path or the easiest possible path. They will pursue the optimally challenging path for them, which is going to be slightly above their current level of competence. So when people get really good at something, it becomes trivially easy to them. It becomes boring.
Yeah.
So fun is actually this critical drive that we have, or this critical instinct we have to optimize challenge so that we learn what we need to learn to do what we want to do. So fun is critical. And so I often say, like, I think the idea of recess is so damaging, because the term recess, we're talking about, when you think about it in a
Yeah.
courtroom or something, a recess is a break from the main event. We're going to take a recess and then we're going to come back to what's important. And so recess in school is, all right, we're going to take a break from the real, what real education, so you can go blow off some steam, go do some things that don't matter, to come back to what's really important. And I would say it's the exact opposite. When kids are out on the
Right.
playground,
Yeah.
that's where they're really learning at an optimal level. That's where they're challenging themselves to the optimal level. They're engaging with things that they're really curious about, and that's when they're going to learn the fastest. And so, anyway, you got me on
Oh,
a really long
you
rant here.
made me think of the flow cycle. There's a 4-stage flow cycle, and one of the stages of that is recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an
Yeah.
important part of that cycle. So is struggle is one of the
Yeah.
parts of that
This.
4-part thing. So it's like so interesting. Yeah, they do. Our mentalities are messed up a lot. And make me wonder. 2 of my grandkids, they go to or they went to Montessori school, which is a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of
Yeah.
learning. And I see how that. I'd never heard of that before they went there, because I didn't grow. I went in the stay in this class like you're talking about, the authoritarian, sit down, shut up, and do what you're told, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you're allowed to be curious and learn at your own pace and be able to, fail, it fosters more learning like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have some critiques of Montessori, but I do think it's it's a substantial improvement over the traditional system. But you brought up a flow, and I know you mentioned you're interested in talking about brain states. That's one thing you had a question about, so maybe that'd be a good segue into that.
Okay. Well, I wanted to bring up your books also, because you have a couple of books. So when in this whole cycle did you write that first book? Where were you in this phase when you wrote that first book of Out of Your Wheelhouse? And where'd you get that title? Tell us about Out of Your Wheelhouse. It's like very intriguing, the title.
Yeah, so this is something I've thought a lot about. You'll notice if you listen to people, I challenge everybody who's listening to try this, because it's really an enlightening experience. But if you listen to people speak, a lot of times they'll use metaphors and analogies will float up in their language. You'll get images, and a lot of times they're idioms or cultural, just common phrases, but they have a lot of value if you dig into them. So, people will say, like, I feel like I'm drowning. They'll use a very imagistic phrase, a very physical phrase, to describe the experience that they're having. right? So like I'm drowning in paperwork, or, I've had people say, I feel like I'm in a storm or a jungle. I'm being chased by tigers. I feel like I'm on a long road and I can't see where it leads. Between a rock and a hard place, common phrases like that. And I think there's a super deep rabbit hole we could go down with this, but I won't, because I'll get back to the question. But we use those phrases because I think that's a hint at our perceived environment. It's not the environment that's right around us. It's our perceived environment. When you say you're drowning, you feel like you're drowning, your body is actually responding to the world around you as if you're drowning. Not exactly, but it's kind of like that. It's an analog. So one of the analogies I found floating up in my language when I was in college was, I'm out of my wheelhouse. I'm no longer in the place of control. So the wheelhouse is the place on the ship where the wheel is, right? It's where you can pilot the ship. It's also where you're the most safe from the elements. So it's you can think of it as a comfort zone, and also the zone of ultimate control. When you're out of the wheelhouse, you're now exposed to the elements. You're exposed to the waves. You no longer steer the ship. You're kind of at the mercy of the sea. And that's what I felt like I was. I felt like I had been in the wheelhouse in high school. At least, it was boring, but I felt very in control of my destiny, so to speak. I felt like I could control what was around me. And then I was in a situation where I no longer felt that way.
And it was scary.
It was terrifying.
Out of it, that was scary. Yeah.
And I really did feel like my ship was sinking too, and I didn't know how to stop it. And so I started writing that book when I found that course that caused me to start asking better questions. And I originally wrote the book just as my own personal notes. I was going to pass them on to my brother-in-law because he was starting. He was going to come to Purdue right after me, essentially. So I was like, hey, here's my notes from my experience. Here's things I learned. And then as I was writing it, I was like, well, I've already got like 50 pages. I might as well just turn this into a book and finish it out and make it more cohesive. And so that's what I did. So I published it right after I graduated. I think like a month after I graduated. I wrote most of it when I was in college.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And you wrote one right after that too. And that's with this Superhuman Playbook. That goes with that academy thing that you're a part of. Why don't you tell us about that whole superhuman thing and put those two together, the academy? Sure. You're a certified Superhuman Academy coach. What is that? And then is that the course you said that you took?
Yeah.
And so then you wrote the book. And it's like, put all those pieces together for us.
Sure. So as I was writing that first book, I reached out to the person who founded the company and ran the course that I had taken that had really started to kickstart my learning adventure, I'll call it, or rediscovering the joy of learning. So I reached out to him for an interview, and he obliged. And so we talked, and I didn't include actual snippets from the interview, but it was kind of just helping me in my thinking as I was writing the book. And so that put me on his radar. And then after I graduated, he reached out to people who he thought could be interested in coaching and helping other people get through his course. And that sounded super fun to me because it had made a major impact on me. That was positive. So I was like, hey, if I can help other people in that way, that sounds like a great thing to do. And so, yeah, that's how I became a coach. And originally I was doing that while I was working as an engineer. So I was kind of just doing that on the side. And eventually I was able to replace my engineering income and just do coaching full time, which was great. Really blessed in that way. And so about, I think it was probably a year after I started coaching, I kind of took over the program, so to speak, just to train other coaches and help them out. And that's when I started writing the Superhuman Playbook. So I co-authored it. I didn't write the whole thing myself. I co-authored it with the other coaches.
Oh, cool.
I led I edited the whole book, which was quite a task too. Many of the coaches, English isn't their first language. So there was a lot of work that went into editing. But what that book really was, I was just really curious from the other coaches, asking them, because they come from all over the world and different backgrounds, what's the thing that you'd like to share with the world? What's the one message from your experience that you'd really like to get out there that you think would be really, really valuable to people? And then just compile all of those. So that's what that book is. I'm really proud with how it turned out. I think it's really cool to get all those different perspectives in one book. So definitely encourage people to check it out. My chapter is kind of weird. It's called Asking for Miracles, and it's all about you know, what happens when you start asking questions and how it changes your life.
Okay. How many different coaches are in there in the book?
I think there's 18 of us total. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really interesting read.
Wow. I want to get into two questions that were on your profile. Get back to the brain states
Oh
and
yeah,
also memory. These are things I think really will help people
sure.
who are listening. One is about memory, because you talk about how people can think they have a terrible memory and they don't. And I also want to speak to people who will start complaining they have a bad memory when they get older. And I think they're causing the problem themselves. But, but how do you help people unlock this ability to remember what they think they can't remember?
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned age. Age is a factor for sure. So uh, I don't need to get in the nitty gritty unless you want to, but there are certain parts of the brain that are more responsible for making what we experience as memory work well, and some of them do. I mean, everything degrades over time, right? So there are some things that are going to naturally get worse. I do think though that there's some really powerful ways to mitigate a lot of the issues with that, because there are different.
Neuroplasticity.
Yeah, exactly. And there are different types of memory, and there are certain ones that degrade faster than others, and you can take advantage of one versus the other, and kind of move around if you understand. So we can start with what it means to like unlock memory. I like to use that phrase because I think a lot of people, it feels like you have a lot of memories that are just locked up and you can't reach them anymore, or you have access, like it seems like your brain should be able to remember a lot, but it's like you're only using, it's like the Limitless movie, you're like only using 2% of your brain or something. Not true, but it feels like that a lot of times. So one thing to think about is, I think a better way to understand what memory is, a lot of people think of it as like there's like a box in your brain and there's memories in there, and if the box is locked, then you can't get them out, and if maybe you can slip some through the cracks every once in a while. But it's like in a place, right? And it's locked away. But I think a much more useful way to think about memory is you can think of, it's called trace decay theory is one of them, which is this idea there's more like pathways. So you can think of, if you've got like a yard with grass in it, and you walk over part of that yard, you're gonna like leave a dent where your footsteps were, right? And if you walk that same path over and over and over again, eventually the grass will die and you'll have a path there. And if you stop walking it for a long time, the grass will grow back, and eventually you won't even know the path was there. I think that's a much more useful analogy for what memory is like. And so when people say that they have a bad memory, and I ask them about, well, do you engage with actually recalling? Like, do you actually walk that path again? Like, when your day is over, do you go back in your head and you think through your day? Do you go back and walk through the day that you just had? If not, well, that path is going to fade very quickly. But the more you walk a path, the longer then it takes it to regrow. And it's not linear. It's more of like an exponential relationship. So like once a path is really well worn, even if you don't walk it, it's going to take a long time for that path to fade. But if you just walk it once, it's like the wind blows and the next day you look out there, it's like the footsteps are gone. Right. So that's especially with like episodic memory, which is your memory of like actual episodes of your life or real events or experiences you've had. That's going to not only decay, but distort very, very quickly. And if you don't go through the process of recalling, then you shouldn't expect it to be there anymore. One thing that happens when you sleep is that your brain consolidates memory. And it's a really important process. It's one reason why if you feel like your memory is bad, it's probably you need to sleep more. One thing that happens when you consolidate memories, you extract the gist or the narrative truth, the lesson from the experiences you had, and the details aren't so important. And so that's one reason why it's actually good that your memories fade. It's good that you forget things. But if you feel like you're forgetting important things, could be because you're not sleeping well, could be physical things, but it also might just be you're not actually actively recalling. You're not spending the time to walk that path. People just don't do that very often. It's like they just expect it to just be there. It's like, well, why? Why do you think it's just going to be there? Another thing is, I think this is one of the most important, is attention. I think the issue people have is a lot more related to attention than it is to memory most of the time. Like people say, oh, I'm just terrible at remembering names. I can never remember people's names. You tell me your name, it's gone immediately. It's like when you think of yourself that way, first of all, you think, I'm not going to remember people's names. Well, when you go talk to somebody and they tell you your name, you're already primed to think, I'm not going to remember it anyway. I'm going to have to ask them again. So why listen? I'm not going to pay attention when they tell me their name. And so you like set yourself up for failure in so many ways. And this happens to me all the time. Like if I'm not paying attention, if I don't catch the information the first time, how am I going to recall it? It's not even there, you know?
Right.
And so if you feel like your memory is bad, it's probably because you're not really paying attention the first time you're exposed to something. Or, and I think this, how much time do we have, by the way?
Got a few more minutes.
Few more minutes. Okay, so we're short on time.
Oh, I want to just pause here anyways for my listeners. Because something you said I think is real important. If you think your memory is bad, to stop and think about, are you paying attention? Are you paying attention to your life? Every day, at work, at home, wherever it is that you are struggling, where you say you have a bad memories, are you paying attention? Because we live in society is very highly full of distractions, and I'm a certified unhackable coach. So it's like, computers get hacked, it's unlawful access. We get hacked by distractions, and then we're not paying attention. I think that's so important that you brought that up about paying attention. So if you think you have a bad memory, start there. Look at where you think you have a bad memory and investigate. Are you paying attention?
And if the answer is no,
you can start.
You can start, but also ask why not, because maybe you're not paying attention because it's not worth paying attention to. And you're actually, what the world that you're engaging with is not the world you should be engaging with in the first place. It's
not fun. It doesn't have the intersection of, what were those two again?
Yeah, interest and challenge.
Interest and challenge. You need the intersection of interest and challenge. You need fun. I remember learning that fun is good. I grew up very authoritarian, and fun was, something you didn't have, sort of like that recess thing. If you put it over in this little box over here, it's like, but Dr. Seuss says fun is good. I started learning that fun is good. And you elaborating on what fun is in a scientific way, it's like, I'm real curious about that some more now.
Yeah, it seems like we might need to have another conversation. Are we supposed to be done in like 3 minutes?
No, that's okay. Well, let's skip to the other question though, because we will talk about that memory for a lot more. But about brain states, what is a brain state? You talk about 3 critical ones and changing them. So we have, like 10, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes here to talk about brain states. Give us like a little snippet on what are brain states and why would anyone care who's not a neuroscientist?
Sure. Yeah. It's valuable and important for anybody. I like to call them brain states. That's more similar to like if you've heard of flow state, it's called a state. Different people have different terms for it. I think Dr. Barbara Oakley calls them modes of thinking. I think that's a fine way to describe it too. Kind of gets a different angle. There are 3 I think everybody should know about, and they're related to activity in the brain. So I won't go into brain anatomy too much, but you have what's called a cerebral cortex. It's kind of the outer layer of the brain. It's important for what we perceive as like conscious thinking is mostly going to be involved with cerebral cortex. Anyway, so
what
the 3 states
right now.
Well, we're doing all of it right now. Okay. What we're most aware of. Yeah. So the 3 states are focus, diffuse, and flow. Those are the 3 I would recommend people just be aware of. And so that cerebral cortex I talked about is going to be really engaged, especially the frontal lobes are going to be really engaged with what we call the focus state. Focus state thinking, that's where you have the most awareness of boundaries, the most awareness of flaws or issues. It's the hypercritical, for good reason, because you want to be aware of when things are wrong, to be able to point them out so you can hopefully fix them. You have the most awareness of time. It's the slowest. It's the most detail oriented, that kind of thing. And this is the state most people are in most of the time. Now you might say, well, I'm not focused very much, but you're still in what I'd call the focus state. This is also where that inner voice, the inner critic is going to be the loudest. So the focus state's really important, and it's really valuable for when you need to be able to identify issues, to recognize them, identify them, point them out so that you can fix them. It's often not the best state to actually fix the problems, though, which is interesting, to actually engage in the process fixing them. Sometimes it is. It's going to be the state that you're going to be most it's going to be most likely to be accessed when you're in a place where you're not as competent. So when things aren't super fun, maybe when your challenge level is too high or you're not particularly interested, you'll probably snap into the state because you're forcing it, a lot of people can probably feel like they're there most of the time. Inner critic's really loud. The flow state you mentioned briefly, it's also called transient hypofrontality. That's a really fancy way to say.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a fancy word.
it's really not that complicated. Transient meaning it's temporary, it's something you go in and out of. Hypo meaning you could think of it as like less frontality, meaning front, so less of the front of your brain. So what I just talked about with focus, it's like the opposite of that. So flow state's going to be a lot more back of brain. And when we talk about back or lower down in the brain, you can also think of the stuff that's the most automatic. You don't have to consciously think about it. The inner critic is really quiet. Your sense of time kind of fades away. Your sense of boundaries kind of fade away. When people say, I felt like I was just one with my motorcycle or my guitar or whatever, it's like your sense of your own physical boundaries kind of fades and you kind of merge into whatever tool you're using or something like that. It's really, it's a state that people like to be in. It's typically when we associate with something being super, super fun, we're talking about being in flow state because the inner critic's turned off. We can just be super present and enjoy the activity that we're engaged with. And this is where you reach that optimal challenge and interest. There's some other criteria, but those are the main ones. That's when you're going to be more in flow state. And then the last state, which most people don't know about, but they know it when they hear it, the diffuse state is super important too. It's the state most people go into. Like if you say, I have my best ideas in the shower, or when I go on walks, or when I go on a bike ride, or when I first wake up in the morning, what you're talking about is the diffuse state. It's when there's no particular region of your brain that's like where the focus of the activity, it's kind of just all over the place. When you feel like you're zoning out. And it's associated also with, if you're familiar with brain waves, it's going to be slower. Typically, you're going to be getting more into the alpha region. That's also the region where it's like in between sleep and wakefulness, where people talk about hypnosis, alpha state. It's not necessarily your alpha state, but it's going to feel a lot more like that. All right, so here's how this is practical and why I think it's valuable to know about these things. So when you are working on a task of any kind and you're finding it to be really frustrating, really difficult, you've identified the problems, you see them, there they are, there's lots of problems, but you don't feel like you're in a position where you can solve them, or it's just taking forever, it's just miserable. The worst thing you can do is continue to just grind on those problems. What you're trying to, so focus state, it's going to be locked into what you're used to doing. It's gonna try to take the hammer and it's going to try to hit everything with the hammer. And if they're not nails that you're working with, it's not going to work very well. And so you need to get in the state where you're the most creative and your brain can just kind of play around with problems. The diffuse state is really good for that.
So how does someone move into that? How, if they're stuck in that, how do you move from this, I want to beat things with a hammer, into the diffuse state? I got to simplify things for people because I talk very simple. So
right. So
I want to stop beating the hammer and diffuse.
Once you've identified the problems, which is what focus state is good at, and you feel like you're stuck, as soon as you feel like you're stuck, moving into diffuse state, usually it just means engage in a behavior that you feel like allows you to zone out the easiest. So go on a walk, go outside, go for a bike ride, work out. For some people that works well. Go take a shower. I don't know, whatever works for you that helps you do that. The most important thing is not what you're doing out here, though. It's what is happening in here. What allows you to disengage and let your brain just play around.
So it's sort of like you put your brain on recess.
Yeah, exactly.
Put your brain on recess. That's you go. I'm frustrated. I'm going to beat things. I'm going on recess.
And it can be really hard for people because the diffuse state, just by its nature, it doesn't feel like you're solving a problem. Like you're not aware of your brain like putting things together and trying different patterns. A lot of it's kind of happening in the background. And so people are like, I'm not making any progress. I got to get back to work. It's like, no, your brain is doing all sorts of stuff.
Well, it
It's
just
just
circles right back to where we started with this, with
exactly.
recess, with the kids at school. They're leaving the classroom and then they're going out to recess where they're doing nothing. No, they're processing the other things. That's just, the importance of recess in a different way, like re-evaluating, redefining what recess is. I really love that.
Yeah, and what you'll find is you'll come up with much more creative solutions. You're going to do it faster. You're going to come up with lots of options. And a lot of times the solutions that you come up with in the diffuse state, a lot of them are terrible, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. You get lots of them, and then you can kind of figure out afterwards, you can go back into the focus state, and then you can evaluate, because it's really good at criticism, right? Evaluate the things that you came up with. And maybe 90% of them are garbage, but the 10%, genius. You wouldn't have thought of them in the focus state. And so rather than spending another 6 hours grinding at your desk to come up with a mediocre solution, maybe spend 2 hours doing something you enjoy, letting your brain kind of do its thing. You come up with a much better solutions. Not only is it more efficient and faster, but it's more effective. You're going to come up with something way better. So it's counterintuitive and it's uncomfortable for people when they do it at first, because they feel like they need to keep just grinding. It doesn't work well. And since I know we're running out of time, the last state, like how to actually trigger it. Again, the flow state, some people, I think, overemphasize the flow state. They're like, you should just be in flow all the time or whatever, because they don't really understand how it works.
Burn out.
You can't. First of all, it's expensive. But the reason you go into flow in the first place is because you're at the intersection of optimal challenge and interest. It's not something you can just force to happen. You need to, you can design your activities to be more conducive to it if you want to. Mm-hmm. So if you're just doing data entry or something like that, and it's trivially easy to you and it's not interesting, you're not going to go into flow doing it unless you can find a way to re-engineer the situation to make it something that's optimally challenging and interesting. Or maybe it's just not the right activity for flow, and that's fine.
Right.
So don't try to force it, and you can engineer your activities. But what I think people should focus on is make sure you're actually pursuing things that are meaningful to you. And then you can think about, all right, what's the best state of mind to be in for the different stages? Usually I recommend start in the diffuse state, let your brain kind of throw things around, go into focus state, identify problems, go back into diffuse to let it kind of figure out creative solutions. And then if possible, that's when you go into flow state to actually execute if you're at that optimal level. And that's awesome. A great pattern.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, this has been just fascinating. And one thing the way I see tying it up with is if you want to learn better, if you want to change how you learn, you need recess and you need fun and curiosity. And these are all things that are enjoyable. We have such a tendency to think of learning as drudgery. And there's so much to be said about learning that is fun and exciting and stuff like that. So how can people connect with you?
Lots of ways. I won't give them all because I know people will forget because they won't pay attention to all of them.
I will have a link in all the show notes. I will have all the links, but just throw something out there where they can find you.
If you want to email me directly, you can do so at curiosityjumpllc@gmail.com. You can reach me there. I do have a live cohort-based course that I teach. I probably won't be running it for a little while because I'm having a baby in 2 months. So I've got a lot of other stuff going on. But if you're interested in that, you can sign up for the waitlist, maven.com. If you look for Discover Your Inner Super Learner, you can probably just type that straight into Google too. You could sign up for that. We've done two cohorts so far, and they've been super fun. Lots of really crazy testimonials from those. But yeah, those are two good spots.
Well, thank you for being with me today on this. I just really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was a blast. Thanks for having me.